Welcome everybody to this Handheld Press book launch. We are here to celebrate the publication of this fine book by Sarah LeFanu, Dreaming of Rose. This is a book that was written while Sarah was writing this book, her 2003 biography of Rose Macaulay. Note the thickness of the hardback. Ours is a slender and attractive paperback at a great deal cheaper price. Sarah is also the author of In the Chinks of the World Machine, which I believe was her first book. And there have been at least two since, probably three, and I haven't got them, and I'm abashed at that. Sarah is going to be in conversation with Sian Norris. Sian, could you wave your hand so we can see you, please?
Hi there.
And Sarah, can you wave your hand just to make sure everybody knows who you are?
Yeah, hi there.
Good. I will now hand it over to Sian. We're going to be having the interview, the conversation for about 40 minutes. If you would like to ask questions, can you use the chat button, or at the end of the interview bit, you can just turn your unmute, you can unmute yourself and ask a question, or you can use the raise hand and be asked to ask. But we'll tackle that in about 40 minutes time. But now, Sian, Sarah, please have a conversation.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you for that great introduction. As Kate mentioned, my name's Sian Norris. I'm a writer and a journalist and also the founder of Bristol Women's Literature Festival. And I'm so excited to be able to interview Sarah this evening about her fantastic book. For those of you who don't know, I'm sure many of you do, Sarah doesn't really need an introduction, but I'm going to give one anyway. In the 80s, she worked for the feminist publishing house, the Women's Press, and then during the 90s edited a number of anthologies of original fiction, as well as in 1989 writing that first book, In the Chinks of the World Machine, Feminism and Science Fiction, which looks at combines readings of the work of feminist science fiction writers, including Joanna Russ, Alice Sheldon, Susie McKee-Charnas and Ursula Le Guin. Sarah was also the artistic director of Bath Literature Festival. She's taught at the University of Bristol, working in the Access Unit for Continuing Education and teaching a diploma on creative writing. Her first single subject biography was of Rose Macaulay, and then she created this sort of incredible journey of being a biographer, of exploring Rose's life, of considering what it is to be a writer and to interact with another writer in Dreaming of Rose. She later wrote a biography of revolutionary Mozambican leader Samora Machel, and her most recent book before Dreaming of Rose's republication was a biography of three English writers, Mary Kingsley, Rudyard Kipling and Arthur Conan Doyle. And in that book, she looks at their involvement in the Anglo-Boer War and looks at the war through the prism of their experience and writing. But this evening, we're here to talk about Rose. But before we do, if we could all just give like a virtual round of applause to Sarah.
Thank you, Sian.
So I thought it would be good to start off with Rose Macaulay. You've written about her as a biographer, you've written about her as a dramatist, creating a play about her work and her life, and you've also written about her through this kind of memoir, this diary, this journal of exploring her life in the process of writing. But what was it that drew you to Rose in the first place, and why were you attracted to her life and her writing?
She was really quite an extraordinary woman. She had great intellectual curiosity, she had great wit, she had a great zest for life, and not just kind of the intellectual life, but there was all sorts of things that she loved, like driving, swimming, going to parties, talking to her friends. And she wrote an enormous amount. I mean, in fact, when I first came across her, I had absolutely no idea. I think I probably first came across Rose a long time ago through her novel, which in fact was her final novel, The Towers of Trebizond, and it's the one that has most often been reprinted. I mean, it's more in print than any of her other novels. And then when I discovered a bit more about her, I was completely amazed to find out that in fact she'd published her first novel in 1906. I mean, she was publishing those early novels of hers, but published at the same time as E.M. Forster's novels, Where Angels Fear to Tread, I'm going to say A Room with a View. Yes, that is right, isn't it? And like his novels, those early novels of hers were very much to do with Italy. I mean, she spent part of her childhood in Italy, and it became for her this kind of paradise from which she was then exiled and which in a way she yearned for the rest of her life. So as well as being somebody with this great energy, intellectual and physical energy, she was also somebody who felt that she was an exile. She had a sense of unbelonging. I mean, absolutely part of that was her unbelonging as a woman in a very male-dominated literary world. So I think that it was that kind of mixture of kind of outwardness and inwardness that that really appealed to me. And I suppose on top of that, it was the fact that she was quite secretive, and I've always been interested in writers who have secrets and kind of what they do with those secrets in their writing and how they live with those secrets. Yeah, so kind of a lot of reasons. And perhaps I should say also, you know, that she wrote an enormous amount, and it wasn't, you know, it wasn't just novels, well, she wrote 23 of those, but she was also a terrific travel writer, and she was a historian and a biographer as well. So it just seemed to me that she was a woman, you know, with a lot with a lot to interest me, I suppose you could say.
With the novels, such a range of different subjects like satire and these novels about travel, and I mean, did she write sci-fi as well, or have I misremembered that?
Yes, she did. Well, sci-fi, speculative fiction, futuristic fiction. One of the titles, in fact, which was published recently by Handheld Press, brought back into print, Whatnot, which is this satirical look at the future, which is a kind of precursor to, and I'm sure was influential on, Brave New World. I mean, it's about eugenics and reproduction and women's reproduction rights and who is allowed to reproduce and all of that kind of stuff. And it's quite creepy, really. But of course, also she put into that, I believe, a lot of her own feelings about what was licit and what was illicit, because she herself was having had a very, very long-term relationship with a married man, which she kept secret, which was the publisher Victor Gollancz, when it all came out after she died, said it was the best kept secret in London. So she put herself into that novel as well. And
Sorry.
yes, sorry, no, carry on.
I was going to say, I mean, that must be the fascinating thing with of a biographer is, you know, even if that secret came out after she died, you can go into the works, you can go into the novels and sort of start to piece these things together and see how she was exploring these ideas and issues and her own personal questions about, yeah, licit, illicit, life, love, relationships, being a woman.
And also the fact that she really loved to be private as well. I mean, she was very careful of her privacy and felt that writers should be allowed to be private, that they shouldn't, you know, always be answering questions about their own personal lives. Although, in fact, you know, she was very kind of gregarious and, you know, and outspoken at times. So, yeah, I mean, it was kind of a mixture of all those things that that first attracted me. And then, you know, the more I discovered about her, the more I became involved in trying to kind of listen to her voice across the years. I suppose you could put it like that, which I suppose is sort of kind of what biography is, isn't it? Trying to catch people's voices, people who've lived in the past, and, you know, and kind of hearing their voices now.
And I was quite interested as well because you've written the biography and you also wrote the play and you've written the memoir, the journal. And I mean, what were the sort of different experiences of writing those in those three different forms? Like, was there a kind of freedom in drama that was taken away with the biography, or did the biography allow you to do things that the drama couldn't allow you to do? Because, you know, how did you kind of approach those different ways of writing, and what were the freedoms and limitations in them?
Well, it was fantastic, actually, kind of working in different forms. It all started off because what I was keen to do to begin with was I wanted to, she made a journey in the 1930s, the late 1930s, through Spain. So it was through this Spain kind of depopulated and ravaged by the Civil War. And she herself was kind of looking to the past and trying to listen to the voices from, you know, centuries ago. and she was also swimming her way down the coast at the same time. And I have, for a long time, I've been a great admirer of the biographer Richard Holmes, and in particular, his collection of essays called Footsteps, Adventures of a Romantic Biographer. And one of those in particular, which is his description of going off in the footsteps of Robert Louis Stevenson across the Cevennes. So my idea was that I would follow Rose's footsteps down the coast of Spain and try and catch her voice as she had been trying to catch the voices of those that had gone before her. Not a single publisher was interested, absolutely nobody. It just wasn't the kind of book that they wanted. But it was suggested, that if I wrote a, I suppose, kind of, conventional biography, then they would be interested. I have to say that I was talking about footsteps. I was walking in the footsteps of two previous biographers. The first was Constance Babington Smith, who is a completely wonderful person herself and who knew Rose in the last years of her life. And the second, an American biographer called Jane Emery. But anyway, it was suggested that I should write a biography, but I really liked this idea of the journey through Spain, not least because when she was writing it up, her lover of 25 years had recently died, and the book that she wrote up, Fabled Shore, it's called, was kind of full of a sense of, well, kind of loss and death and a hidden grief. And I was keen not to let that idea go. So I wrote it up as a proposal for Radio 4, for a drama, and rather to my amazement, they said yes, they'd be interested. So I was working on that, I think, in the first kind of year or so when I was working on the biography. And I found it really kind of fruitful, I suppose I could say. One, that I was working with facts and letters and archives, and at the same time I was basically making things up. I mean, the play it ends up, it's a series of letters that she writes to her lover, Gerald O'Donovan, and it's only at the end that you realise that he's dead, so she's never going to post those letters. So she's speaking to him and speaking to herself and speaking to her lost love and all of that. And I think in some kind of way, perhaps it did feed into the biography that I was writing. And also it meant that I was actually thinking about her at different periods of her life. So when I was writing about her childhood in Italy, in this place called Varazze, I was also thinking of her as a woman who was getting old, a woman in her, I can't remember, 50s, 60s, who was driving on her own down through Spain. And it just created some kind of tension, I think I would say, rather than balance, that I found really kind of helpful and kind of encouraging to myself. And then at the same time, I was writing this journal about my researches and about writing the play. So really, I was dealing with the same sort of material, the same base material, but in 3 different forms. But I think lots of writers do that, actually. I mean, I think a lot of writers, do explore their material in different ways and different things come out of them. And certainly Dreaming of Rose is very different from either the play or the biography. I mean, because it's about me dreaming of Rose.
And I think it's important for people who haven't read the book yet, that dreams come into it. I mean, you really were having dreams about her, or having dreams about the subjects you were exploring in the research and in the play and the biography. I mean, one of the things I found really fascinating about the journal is the writer's life, traveling around, researching, sitting in dusty libraries, making nervous phone calls to ask people questions, and also a little bit of precarity, right? There's all, concerns about funding, money, if grants, and the joy of getting some money, and then fears about where the next paycheck's going to come in. And I think in terms of, you know, when you were writing the journal, is it something that you've always done, kept a journal? Was it kind of a continuation of that practice, or was it specifically for writing the biography and linking it to that?
I've always kept a journal, but I suppose when I started writing about the work that I was doing, the research that I was doing, I realised that I really wanted to focus on that. I mean, it seemed to me kind of right that that's what I should do. I think partly because there was so much material that couldn't go into the biography. I mean, when you read biographies, they do seem quite seamless. And the person who wrote them, I mean, I think that every biography has the biographer inside them, inside the book, to a greater or lesser extent. I mean, there's no such thing as the kind of completely objective biographer, the person who's kind of standing back and, you know, writing the story of somebody's life. How could there be? I mean, it's about your, you know, your relationship with your subject, of course, kind of affects the way that you write it. Oh, no, I've lost my train of thought. Sorry about that. Yes, because there was so much material there that couldn't go into the biography. I mean, as you say, there was all the stuff about, you know, where's the next check going to come from? Oh, I got a bit of money to go off to Italy, say. And also all the fears and the frustrations that I just found it very, I suppose, helpful, or more than that, actually, kind of interesting for me to write about. And also because often, I mean, you yourself as a writer know, you often don't know what the problem is until you write about it. Or I find I don't know what my fears are until I write about them. So it was, yeah, I'm going to come back to the word helpful, actually, but it was more than that. It was kind of quite engrossing, actually. I see it really as kind of the underside of the biography, the kind of dark underside of it. It's not all fears and frustrations.
No, I was going to say, because there's wonderful moments of light. I mean, one of the things that comes through is the friendships you have with other creative people, with other women who are writing, but also the connections of the people you interview had with Rose and the way that they speak about her, sometimes with hostility, to be fair, but also these voices traveling across the century. And it really made me think about this idea of why do we need biography, and what is the importance of biography? And I was wondering if you could speak a little to that, about why you feel we need to be, why do we need biography? Why is it so important to us as readers, and and to understand the culture that we're living in, or the cultures that we've been shaped by?
Well, I mean, I think biography offers a different way of seeing yourself in the present. I mean, it's not so much a question of you know, of offering solutions to present problems. I mean, you know, times are so different, but the fact is, you know, we're human now, and they were human then. And well, I mean, to talk about Rose Macaulay, I mean, the thing that I found really engrossing for me to think about was how she was a woman writer. That is, you know, how women in the past have managed to lead intellectual lives, to lead writing lives, but at the same time to lead a life of the heart. I mean, how do you manage not to sacrifice one of those things, particularly, you know, as the day-to-day burden of ordinary living so often has fallen upon women's shoulders and continues to do so. I mean, you know, domesticity, kind of the running of families, the running of houses. Now, Rose wrote quite a lot about the problem of women. It was a great thing in the 1920s. You know, everybody was terribly exercised, partly because of all these what were called redundant or superfluous women after the First World War. But anyway, I mean, the gap had been growing for some time before that in the population, in the demographic, between women and between men. And Rose, who was, you know, she was a terrific journalist, a very witty journalist. And so she was often, you know, writing about women, you know, their dark past, their fearful future for, for the popular press, who she also satirized, as well as satirizing. She satirized them in the marvelous novel Potterism, which Handheld, I'm glad to say, has reprinted. But she was kind of satirizing that whole kind of, what are we going to do about the problem of women? And she was kind of very clear, that she wrote about the kind of the what was it? I think she called it the unfortunate tradition that had it that cooking and cleaning was somehow peculiarly a woman's task. Now, she was very careful to avoid cooking and cleaning. And I think that by avoiding that, that was why she was able to write so much and to think so much and to do all the things that she did. Right, I may have gone kind of a bit off what you asked me, but it seems to me that that is something that concerns women writers today as well. How you, there's that awful phrase, isn't there? How you juggle, and it's not a question of juggling, but it's to do with sacrifice and, and what you do with your heart and what you do with your head, as well as what you do with your hands in the home.
I think it's so important, and I know so many women, be they writers or not writers, women just of all sort of different backgrounds, are still grappling with this issue of how do you create, how do you work, how do you have fall in love, how do you be, have these lives, this having it all that we were sold as the goal of feminism, but actually what does having it all mean? Does it mean doing it all? And so you're completely right, like we can go back to these stories, we can go back to these figures and see how they were grappling and asking the same questions. And it's not necessarily about the same solutions, but realizing there's a commonality and a shared history and a shared struggle, which can be so important.
Exactly. I mean, I think we have an enormous amount to learn from the women that have gone before us.
And I mean, one of the things that really comes out is, I think you say very, very close to the beginning of the book, this idea that you have to ask, don't assume when you're reading about people living 40 or 50 years ago that they are necessarily dead. And don't assume that they are going to be around for you to interview at your leisure in a year or two's time. And that just struck me again about this importance of biography, of keeping voices alive and making sure we don't lose that record, those stories, that we have this kind of living memory of people. I mean, what were your experiences of talking to people about Rose's life, and how did you kind of get to these people, and what did you learn from them and their stories?
Well, often I was very nervous about getting to them, and I did think, that person, goodness, couldn't possibly still be alive, but of course that person was still alive. Well, that particular bit that you read out, I mean, that was Constance Babington Smith, who was really, quite elderly by the time I got to her. But I was very nervous at the beginning because I am nervous about getting in touch with strangers and saying, please, will you tell me about the work you did on this, or the person that you knew that, or whatever. And kind of, well, as I recount in the book, I mean, obviously, I got all sorts of different responses. And there were some people who actually didn't want to speak to me. And I really understood why they didn't. One of them, in fact, was the novelist Francis King. And he was really, I mean, he was great. He was so kind of courteous about it. But he said, I am more or less the only person left alive amongst my friends. And people are always ringing me up and saying, please, can you speak to me about so and so and so and so and so and so? And, I just really don't want to. And I completely understood that. I mean, particularly as a part of me, which I suppose is kind of the non-biographer part, often I feel, no, I don't want to talk to you. I just want to kind of sit at home and think my own thoughts. So I think I'm a bit, I mean, maybe some biographers are more kind of outward going than I am, but I think that everybody has this kind of nervousness about approaching people. But I have to say, I met some, wonderful people who told me a lot about Rose and about their relationships with Rose. And so I discovered a whole kind of different aspect of her. I mean, for example, speaking to her goddaughter, and then I saw Rose as this kind of marvelous godmother who took her goddaughter and her sister to Butlins, for example, for a week and had the most wonderful time.
And that's where the importance of those voices is so real, isn't it? Because you could look at the letters, you could look at the articles, and you have this image of the professional, the person that is presenting herself to the world. But then when you talk about those personal relationships, you start to see the rounded figure, the woman, the human being, the person who had friendships and connections that might be hidden from us.
Yeah, the multifariousness of it. I mean, I suppose that's how you kind of that's what you get from from the other people who knew your subject. And so you just have to be bold enough to approach those people in the first place. And and certainly some people were kind of wary of me. I mean, lots of people don't like the idea of biographers sniffing around, I suppose. And maybe I think people do get worried, what if some awful secret is uncovered. I mean, some of the people I spoke to were members of Gerald O'Donovan's family. I mean, Rose was very close to the family of the man who she did have this relationship with for 25 years. That in itself was kind of an interesting thing. It was as if she got that kind of the domestic life that she had decided not to have herself, but got it through them, and and got a great deal from it. But then I turn up and I start asking questions, and so you think, I do understand if people, in fact, they were extremely welcoming, but I understand when people are a little bit wary, and so sometimes you just have to be a bit bullying, I think. So I had to make myself be a bit bullying, and there was another occasion, in fact, when somebody who had known Rose well and had been a good friend of hers and had been on holidays with her in Spain, said that she would give me a handful of letters that she had. And rather than me saying, great, I'll be around tomorrow afternoon to pick them up, I kind of sat around at home waiting quietly for her to send them to me, and she changed her mind. So if I was doing that again, I would be bolder.
It's hard though, isn't it? Because as you say, you want to be respectful of that space. And I also think that kind of, sort of like, oh, I don't know these people. I'm phoning you up, I'm asking for things, and we want to respect that. But also, you can't judge for people's changing minds. And I wanted to touch on something you mentioned earlier about this kind of, how biography can't be objective. It's always going to be sort of part of your interpretation in your life. And one of the things, two of the sections in the journal I found so fascinating were the one in Italy and the one when you go to Trebizond. Am I saying it right?
Yeah, well, it changed its name, so it was Trebizond back in the days. Well, back in the days before she wrote The Towers of Trebizond, but now it's Trabzon.
Trabzon, yeah.
I think I call it both interchangeably, actually, probably.
And there was a moment when you're in Italy when you sort of are thinking about her as a childhood, and she almost seems quite far away, and you were sort of expecting to get there and being able to sort of walk in her shoes and inhabit it, but you couldn't reach her. But then in Turkey you almost felt closer because she was this sort of older person who was at a different stage of life. And then it linked to Richard Holmes and his dream about seeing Robert Louis Stevenson over the bridge and not getting across that bridge. And I mean, where are the kind of joys but also the risks of over identifying with the person that you're writing with, or trying to find a connection that may not be there, but also that excitement of exploring it and asking those questions of yourself and what you want out of this exploration and this journey of following this woman's life?
I mean, it is all those things kind of simultaneously, or one after the other. Trying to find somebody, and then a kind of disappointment that you don't find them where you thought you would find them. And I did feel that about Ferrazzi when I went there, and it was partly because of the Ferrazzi that she had created in her own writing, which I then came to see was different from the Ferrazzi, from the kind of mundane, I mean the real world Ferrazzi at that time. I mean, I was completely amazed because I thought that it was, from what she'd written, it was this tiny little sleepy fishing village, and there was just her and this very, very intense family life. The children called themselves the 5, although in fact there were 6, although that's kind of a different story. But this very kind of intense childhood, imaginative life, and not just imaginative, kind of physical life they lived. And then I got there and then I saw all these pictures of Varazzi in the 1890s, and it was this, it was this, kind of big holiday resort with the Grand Hotel and the hotels here and there and the sea, I mean, it was like, the South Coast last summer, you could barely move for people in the sea. And that, there was Rose kind of imagining just her and her brothers and sisters and nobody else at all. So that was kind of a bit odd, really. And I didn't find any kind of, I didn't really find any physical trace there either. So I think perhaps I was a bit disappointed. And it was a bit different when I went to Trebizond or Trabzon with my great travelling companion, Monica McLean, who's here, I think, this evening. Because again, it was kind of quite difficult to begin with to find traces of her, partly because there were certain kind of obstacles in our way of finding various things, kind of not least actually getting into the old, the ruins of the towers themselves. But I actually, in the end, I did feel I felt I did kind of catch a glimpse of her there. And I think that by then I'd come to think that places where she was away from home, and I think maybe this goes back to the kind of Richard Holmes thing about catching a glimpse of somebody, and you can't actually catch the whole person, you just catch a glimpse. And when they're away from home, perhaps it's easier when they're away from their kind of quotidian surroundings, or where they spent years, as she did in Italy, where they were just passing through, you yourself are passing through. And so you're both sort of, she was in pursuit of her ghosts or phantoms, and in a way I was in pursuit of her ghost, I suppose. I mean, in a way that's sort of how I look at biographical subjects. You can't catch them in reality because they're dead, but you can sort of catch a glimpse of their ghost and somehow describe that. And I did feel that in Trebizond.
And your descriptions of the hotel where she goes, but also that's in her novel, and your experiences of the plates and the Natashas in the restaurant, as they're called, and it's just so vivid. I mean, you could read a whole kind of travel piece about that trip and travel with you, and perhaps that's the next thing, maybe that will one day somebody will be chasing a glimpse of you through Trebizond, because the writing is so vivid and so exciting to follow. I mean, one of the other, sorry.
No, I was just going to say, if that's the case, I hope that the Yeşilyurt Hotel, which features so centrally in the towers of Trebizond, is still there. I mean, I was, as I describe in the book, I was amazed that it was there. I'm always kind of turning up at places and thinking that they're not going to be there any longer. Like I think, oh, that person, oh, they can't be around any longer. And then I don't know why maybe I'm a pessimist by nature, I don't know. But then it's kind of great, So, I mean, Monica and I turned up in Trebizond, and it was dark, it was nighttime, and then we just went to look for somewhere to eat, and there was the Yeşilyurt Hotel. And those of you who are here watching this, who've read the Tales of Trebizond, you'll remember the Yeşilyurt and Mr. Yoram, who is called down by mistake to the narrator of the novel, who thinks that she's saying, I don't understand what you're saying, but in fact is saying to the receptionist, please call to Mr. Yoram and ask him to come down. It's a bit unlikely, really. And he does, day after day. And there was the Yeşilyurt Hotel, where, as you say, we went in and said, oh, is this a restaurant? Can we eat here? And found ourselves in this kind of, this modern world, where young women from Russia, from Georgia and beyond, as they were known as Natasha, come through to Turkey. Bizarre. Don't know what Rose would have made of that.
No, but it's such a vivid piece of writing. And the way you talk about it, it brings everything to life, and you can sort of feel, you can hear the chatter of the hotel when you're reading your descriptions of it, which is just wonderful. And yeah, people will be following that glimpse, following those ghosts. And one of the other central spaces to me in the journal was the Wren in Cambridge, and where you were going in and looking through all the archives and looking at the letters and all of this rich information. And it really struck me that around the time that Rose would have been writing, women would have been excluded from that space. And then I started thinking about Virginia Woolf and how she, can't walk across different parts of Cambridge when she's writing A Room of One's Own. And I mean, how did it feel to be in that space that has such this kind of patriarchal male history, researching a woman that was at risk of being written out by a male patriarchal canon? And I don't know, was there a sort of sense of subversion of sort of celebrating and exploring and writing back into history this woman when you're in this kind of male, the echelons of male academia, I guess?
Well, it's funny really, because that wasn't really what I was thinking about when I was in the Wren, although I was very aware that Rose Macaulay herself felt excluded from the academic world. I mean, her father was an academic. Her father was a tutor at Cambridge. She herself had been to Somerville College, but but it was, as you say, I mean, it was a patriarchal world, and she did have a kind of yearning to be part of that. And saw Cambridge as a very, Cambridge was a very important place for her. And she wrote about it in her historical novel, They Were Defeated, where she brings her young female poet, a young woman called Julian Conybeare, to Cambridge. And it ends tragically, but there's a lot of kind of yearning there for this space that is denied young women. But I have to say, actually, in the Wren itself, I found that kind of, I was thinking about that much less than one could think about when kind of, looking at the outside of all the kind of buildings and the architecture and all of that kind of stuff. And, and knowing that Cambridge didn't allow women to be officially members of the university until 1948, which is pretty recent. Really, it's quite shocking. I was shocked when I discovered that. But in the Wren, I mean, I just loved being in the Wren. I mean, I love being in libraries. I love being in archives. There's something so, there's something so quiet and cut off from the rest of the world and a world of its own. But the other thing that I find in archives and in libraries is that when you've been having doubts about what it is that you're doing, which I think all writers do in whatever form they're writing in, but in something like biography, when you're thinking, who on earth is going to want to read this? Why is this person's life interesting? Oh, it's all been done before. I'm probably not going to find anything new. All that kind of stuff. And then you go to an archive, and it is just it's a complete and total validation. And the archivists are there. It wouldn't occur to them that you wouldn't want to be doing this. It's as if this is kind of the only thing that you can do with your life. And it's a fantastic feeling that you're doing something that is just accepted as the most normal thing in the world. That is, looking through somebody's diary from 1860, even if there's nothing kind of hugely important in it, kind of that's not the point. Whatever it is that you're doing, kind of value is given to it there.
Absolutely. And, and again, like finding those voices, catching those glimpses, going into archives, and, the excitement of seeing someone's handwriting even is, you can't get over that sometimes. It's just this magical process of research and the connections that you start to make and build, and it all comes together. And yeah, as you say, someone cheering you on as the archivist, like, yes, this is what needs to happen.
Yeah.
Well, we've been chatting for about 40 minutes, and I would really encourage people to put their questions to Sarah in the chat, because there's just so many different aspects we could talk about, and I know people will have loads of fantastic questions. I mean, my last question is a sort of the $1 million question, really, that taps into your work at Women's Press, but also taps into Handheld's work of like republishing women writers, and I think a lot of people are coming to know Rose Macaulay's work much more. It seems to me that I hear her mentioned a lot more than I perhaps did previously. And we are having this moment, I feel, of once again, like in second wave feminism, of bringing back women into the canon that may have been forgotten or excluded, or, you know, just lost because of the sort of the patriarchy, basically. And I mean, what other women writers would you like to see kind of brought back or explored, or are there any lives that you would like to write that you haven't written yet?
I'm not at the stage at the moment of thinking about another life at the moment. I mean, there are other writers who deserve to be brought back in. And I do think that, I mean, when I wrote my biography of Rose Macaulay, she really wasn't very well known at all, even though there'd been two previous biographies, but they were both out of print. She was very kind of, you know, marginalized or niche. And I think that has definitely changed over the intervening 20 years. And it's partly changed because of publishers like Kate at Handheld. But you get, I think people are recognize more how much part of what kind of role she played in the first half of the 20th century in literature, in writing. She was she had all sorts of connections, and she was never, I think it was Rosamund Lehman who said that she was always in transit, that she was everywhere but never at the center. She kind of kept herself on the edge, and I think that that's partly why she's such an interesting character and such an interesting writer. So to answer kind of, you know, the another bit of your question, so next year, Handheld are bringing out a novel called Latchkey Ladies by Marjorie Grant Cook, who is kind of completely vanished off the face of English literature, and herself was an extremely elusive woman and wrote under different names. I mean, she didn't always write under Marjorie Grant Cook, and was a very close friend of Rose Macaulay's, and a close friend of the O'Donovan family as well. And she kind of dips in and out of sight here and there. And this book, Latchkey Ladies, is a book about these, you know, what were called the kind of the redundant women, and what young women in particular did in the 1920s, and the kind of great expansion in office work, and what it meant to be, well, the kind of the contradictions around the idea of an independent life. I mean, again, it's to do with, you know, kind of, you know, the life of the heart, and, you know, and how you live a life as a modern woman. And I'm really delighted that, you know, that Kate at Handheld is bringing that one back. I mean, there are other writers of that period, but, you know, but some of them are more, are better known than, well, certainly than Marjorie Grant Cook, who's hardly known at all, but have been more consistently in print than Rose Macaulay. I mean, I think, you know, that there was a big resurgence when, you know, when people discovered, whenever it was, kind of, you know, make a wild statement, yeah, 30 years ago or whenever, you know, when Virginia Woolf was rediscovered. And then alongside her, writers like Dorothy Richardson, who again had been very kind of peripheral up until then. I think there are probably lots more.
I do feel like we're on this great, you know, like with second wave feminism, when there was this real kind of push to rewrite women back into the canon, into history. And I feel like we're in a sort of second phase of that, because, you know, I remember Jean Rhys's autobiography went back into print recently after it'd been out of print for ages. And again, like she seems to be having a moment as well. People are really interested in these stories of what does it mean to be a woman? How do I be a woman in modern society? You know, how do I balance all of these different things? Although obviously Jean is a lot more depressing and doesn't offer any good answers, maybe. But yeah, I'm so pleased about Latchkey Ladies, because yeah, when I was reading the journal, I was like, I have to have this book. This is so up my street. Okay. So we've got some questions in the chat. So I'm just scrolling through them quickly. So we've got a question from Jenny Newman, who asks, do you believe that your close knowledge of Macaulay and her work has changed your own writing practice?
Oh gosh. Right. My immediate answer to that is I don't know. Um, Actually, oh dear. Has it changed my own writing practice? Okay, well, I think my writing practice is kind of different from Rose's. I mean, for a start, I keep a journal, and she didn't. She wrote letters. She wrote masses of letters. She was always writing letters. Every opportunity she had, she would scribble down letters. I write quite a lot of letters too, but not nearly as many as she did, and kind of decreasingly these days. Although I do write quite lengthy emails, I'm sure some people can attest to that. um, I mean, to be able to write in the range of forms that she wrote, to be able to write, um, you know, experimental fiction that's really kind of pushing the bounds of the form, to be able to write satire and comedy, to be able to write, uh, what you might call kind of, realist family novels, which I absolutely love, actually. I mean, that example hasn't changed my writing, but I admire it hugely. Doesn't really answer Jenny's question.
It's such a huge range of work as well. And as you said at the beginning, you sort of, I think people who know about Rose's work are sort of like, oh, the 1920s, those are the novels. But actually the fact that she was writing from the mid 1900s and that contemporary of Forster in that way is, yeah, it feels like there's just more and more and more to discover and across all of these different genres and forms.
Yeah,
We've
and of
got a
course,
question from Karen.
Sorry, I was just going to say that she also wrote, one of the very first anti-war novels in the middle of the First World War, 1916, On Competence and Others. And that was, I mean, when I was growing up, there was a canon of male writers about the war. There was Sassoon, there was Graves, there was Blunden, Rose Macaulay, nobody'd ever heard of her. And it's a terrific novel and, and very passionate. And that kind of, and it makes you kind of, something like that also makes you, her response to the war makes you understand, how people, didn't want another war in the 1930s. The First World War was kind of just behind them, it was like kind of 5 minutes ago. So, so of course they didn't. And I think that's something that's kind of forgotten, rather. Sorry, I'm going off on a tangent there. Sorry.
I think it's a really important point. And women's writing of the First World War, I think there was that Virago anthology, Scars Upon My Heart, but for ages that was the only thing you ever really saw of women writing about war, the impact of war on their lives. And again, it's like hopefully these narratives are kind of coming back, or not coming back because they were always there, but coming back into prominence or into view. Because how can you understand the past if you're only hearing from one perspective?
Something else that I would like to see being brought back, if we're talking about kind of recovering women's voices from the past, I would like to see some of those women science fiction writers, feminist science fiction writers of the 60s and 70s being brought back. And I think, I think the time is ripe. I mean, with Gilead on our screens and into whatever kind of series it is now, and younger women writers being very interested in using to explore things like climate change. But actually, there was a generation before, and I'd like to see them being brought back into print.
Yeah, absolutely. So that you understand and start to understand that ecosystem. And obviously, there's the few greats that we know, but who else was writing? Who else? What issues were they exploring? How were they working together and answering each other's work? There's lots to be, lots of women's writing that we need. But luckily, we've got Kate. We've got Kate busy publishing many of these books that have been ignored for too long. I've got a question from Karen, which is, I was fascinated by the parts of the book which explored the biographer's art, and it often seemed as if some of your discoveries were random and unexpected. Is the thrill of the search and the whole research process part of the appeal? I mean, the appeal of writing biography?
Yes, it is. And I felt that, that there's always a lot of serendipity involved. I mean, I really felt that, that things happened kind of by luck or by chance. Although obviously if I hadn't been kind of investigating things related to that, then those things wouldn't have happened to me, or I wouldn't have noticed them, or something like that. But I love the way that chance affects things, and that good luck for one person, and you suddenly realize that it's related to something else that you know about, maybe in some different context, but you can make those connections. And I think that thrill of making the connections and of discovering things is marvelous, and I really, really enjoy it, and it offsets the anxiety that I have, because I do suffer from the anxiety of of not finding anything new. That thing, why am I bothering to write this book? And I mean, it happened in the biography that I wrote more recently as well. I mean, not with Mary Kingsley, because I mean there have been biographies of her, but she's not hugely well known. But writing about somebody, well, my other two subjects, Kipling and Conan Doyle, this sense, oh my goodness, they've all been written about so much. Although they have mainly, I was going to say they have mainly been written about by men. That's not actually entirely the case. I mean, Jan Montefiore, for instance, wrote a fabulous book about Kipling, and there have been others. But anyway, so yes, kind of the thrill, the thrill of serendipity is great. I love it.
And that kind of relates to May Kay's question, which is, what was the process of combining the pieces together? So I guess, did you sort of look at Rose's life and be like, right, I'm going to go chronologically, or was it more a kind of jigsaw of fitting in different relationships and friendships and hearing from different people and seeing where that fitted into another idea of her life? Or did you kind of go like, right, she was Italy, then the next stage and the next stage and the next stage?
Right. No, it wasn't like that. But I have to say the chronology of a person's life is hugely helpful as a structure to be working with. And I tend to write, I mean, with Rose and with later books as well, kind of sort of all over the place. I'm writing about something there, and then I'm writing about something there, and then I'm writing about something there. And then I get into a great big tangle about it. And in fact, with my biography of Rose Macaulay, oh gosh, I think it was my friend, the poet Diana Hendry, who said, why don't you just say Rose Macaulay was born on such and such a day in such and such a place, and take it from there? And it was like this kind of incredible liberation for me. And I did. And I used that structure. Although I have to say also that when I'm writing about writers, and I almost always do write about writers because I find them so interesting, I mean, it is through the works that I sort of start off with them.
And I mean, also having the journal, that is a chronological journey by its very definition, and taking you through the process of you writing it and understanding where you start and where it takes you and where you go on this journey. Lucy Bannister has asked, I remember being recommended The Towers of Trebizond by my mother when I was in my 20s. How would you recommend the writings of Rose Macaulay to young women today?
How would I recommend them? What you mean, kind of, why should they read them?
I guess so, yeah.
Right, okay. Well, I mean, one of the reasons is something like The Towers of Trebizond is it's wonderfully funny. And I think that is a huge recommendation. I don't think, I think sometimes people think, oh, writers who are funny, comic writers, they're not quite so good as Leo Tolstoy. But actually, I think that to be comic about the human condition, even if that is expressed through a journey to Trebizond with a very eccentric aunt who has a Bactrian camel. I mean, if that's the way that it falls out, then that's the way that it falls out. But she is actually writing about the human condition. So I suppose the answer is, read Rose Macaulay because she writes about the human condition. But certainly some of her novels are gloriously funny. And that, I think, is recommendation enough.
Absolutely. I'm all about finding joy in novels at the moment.
Yeah.
You know, you can find a joy and also the understanding of the human condition and go through the whole gamut of emotions. But reading something that makes me smile and laugh is in these times very much needed, shall we say. Well, I'm going to hand back over to Kate now, but I just want to say it's been an absolute joy to talk about the book with you, and I wish that we were doing this in real life and we could all, you know, cheer, and because it's such a great piece of work, and but also you were just such a great writer and a force for good in the literary world, and so thank you for everything that you've done and for being here tonight.
Well, thank you very much, Sian. Thank you so much, and thank you everybody for being here tonight.
Thank you both. That was a terrific interview. I am absolutely delighted, and I hope that everybody has enjoyed it.